Hello, all of you beautiful hive scum and followers of the Four-Armed Emperor, and welcome to another Astromax video. We're doing another one of these. Build some models videos. Two reasons. One, I'm feeling a little under the weather this week, and also because we're talking list building finally, so I thought it'd be fun. We're going to build some models and build some lists at the same time. But wherever you are, I hope that spring is treating you very well. I hope that your modeling is going well. I hope your hobbying is going well. I hope life outside of the tabletop is going well for you. And I appreciate so much that you are here checking out my videos. First and foremost, I want to thank all of these subscribers out there. You are all wonderful and amazing, and I appreciate your comments and your support so much. Can't thank you enough for that. And I really appreciate everyone who's been jumping down into the comments. It's just a fun, nice feeling of community, which is one of the big things that this game and this hobby is all about, right? It's about building community. This episode, as I mentioned, is list building, and we got a lot to go over, so we're gonna jump right into it. So our time is nigh. Let's overload our fuel cells, because the day of ascension is upon us. Before we get into the full breakdown on the list building, a couple things we need to talk about between when I made some of the slides for this video and when this video is actually going to go out very late. And again, I apologize for that. There was a Balance Dataslate that came out because of course there was. So I was trying to get this one out before the Balance Dataslate. It actually works out fine that it's after, but there are a couple of slides where we're talking about secondaries that are no longer really correct. So just keep that in mind. I'll point them out when we get to them, but there is that. We've gone roughly 10 videos now talking about the rules and the data sheets and whatnot of the Codex. So we've worked our way through the meat of the Genestealer Cult Codex, and now it's time to start implementing a plan to take what we learned from the Codex and put it onto the battlefield. We're not quite there yet, right? Mustering our army is the last crucial step to that. So this is kind of the in-between video, and then going forward, we're going to be looking at how some of this theory actually plays out on the tabletop. So that's what the future holds for us coming out of this episode. So what I did for this one, because list building is as much of an art as anything else, and everyone's going to have their own approach to it because everyone's going to have a different play style, and there's not one right way to build a list. There are a few best practices, but how you get there is entirely up to you. So I just kind of went through and made a sort of step-by-step for what my list building process is, and we'll walk through that. And I'll talk you through some of the decisions that I made and why I made them, and also some of the decisions that are very common in sort of the more global meta. All right, so let's get started with sort of step one, where we start with building a list. And this is going to be really big picture stuff in step one. So really, a couple of these questions are going to be pretty obvious. It's going to be, what am I trying to build for? What limitations do I have? What outcome am I looking for? Is this a list I'm putting together for a tournament? Is this a list I'm putting together to just go have a friendly game? Am I limited by anything? Am I limited by what's in my collection? The answer for 99% of us is going to be yeah, what I own and what is ready, and the financial limitations are a real thing. So we want to keep that in mind when we're building a list. We also want to keep in mind what we think our playstyle is, or what we know our playstyle is. If we know that we really love the psychic phase and we really love melee, we're going to want to pick choices that support that. If we know we want to build around crossfire and shooting, we want to pick choices that support that, right? So what we're going to do for this exercise is we're going to say we're building a list for tournament play. We want it to be competitive, but we also have a specific sub-faction in mind that we're building around, so that's going to limit us a little bit there. The sub-faction we're going to take, which is Hivecult, we're going to build a crossfire shooting. So that's kind of the big picture plan. There are a couple limitations for models that we own, but we'll get to that as they come up. The next step in my process, once I kind of figure out what I know I'm doing big picture wise, is we're going to pick a sub-faction. And also you could call this, we're going to pick a build around. So what is it that we're going to focus on and that we think is going to give us the best tactical advantage, and how are we going to leverage our unit selection to maximize that advantage? So like I said, I've already picked out Hivecult for this list because, one, I think it's going to be fun. I think it fits narratively with the campaign that I have going on. I think even though we're building this for tournament and Arcs of Omen, I think it's still going to be a decent enough selection that it'll be competitive and fun to play. But there are going to be some obvious shortcomings to it that some of the more popular meta choices are going to be able to avoid. And we'll look for those as we go through this video. So up on the screen there, you'll see we have a couple of other cult options that I put up to point out some build arounds. So a really common one right now in mirrored cults is Accustomed to Toil, Industrial Affinity, and Deep Supplies. This all connects really well to put together a crossfire heavy shooting list. Accustomed to Toil is your mini transhuman, which pairs really well on neophytes because there's a lot of weapons with +1 to wound that are going to be wounding them on 2s that will no longer be wounding them on 2s, so you get a slight boost to your durability and your stayability on the table. Industrial Affinity is going to level out your shooting, so you won't take any penalties for moving and shooting your heavy weapons. You also will avoid any modifiers that your opponent might have, such as -1 to hit if I'm in cover or something like that. You're going to cut through all of that, so it really evens out your shooting. One of the things you want to consider in list building, first and foremost, is going to be efficiency. So how do I maximize the efficiency on the dice to get the most beneficial results? And Deep Supplies helps with that as well, because you get some re-rolling in there as well that helps on those heavier weapons. So that's kind of a traditional meta build for mirrored cults. There's a lot of things you could do instead of Deep Supplies. You've seen all kinds of variants, but to keep it kind of simple and not talk about too many different things, we put Deep Supplies on there. Now, if we look at Pauper Princes, the two obvious build arounds here are the Reliquary of Saint Tendark. This is a 5+ invulnerable save. This pairs really well on a character that can partner up with a Nexos and throw that 5+ invulnerable save around the board as well as within their own radius. Devoted Zealots is going to give you +1, as well as a few other things, is going to give you +1 to your hit rolls on the charge, which helps with your acolytes and their mining weapon selections, particularly, the cutters. Now you can ignore that -1 to hit, or something with the drills, you get +1 to hit, which helps auto wounds. That is also powerful. And then typo number 1 that's on here, Xenoprovit, is not really a build around. It could be useful if you're doing big blobs of acolytes. One of the dangers of them is that they start taking a lot of casualties in melee and you start losing units to attrition. Xenoprovit might be able to help with that, but I'm very non-committal to that. It'd be better if it was spelled correctly. We have the Hivecult, which is what we're going to be building around today. So Disciplined Militants is going to give us an advance in action as well as a fallback and shoot. A fallback and shoot might be situational. It could be handy. The goal is not to get our neophyte blobs engaged in melee, but it's going to happen. So the ability to get them out of melee and still shoot is going to be okay. And then Crossfire is going to help limit that -1 to hit penalty. And then what really attracted me to this particular cult was the Hive Lord Warlord trait, to be able to get exploding 6s. So we're going to partner that up with a Nexus, and we should be able to get at least 3 units around the board that can shoot with exploding 6s. I tested this out a couple of times on neophyte blobs with mining lasers. Was pretty happy with the number of extra shots throughout the course of a game that generated. And then with the seismic cannons, with the number of dice that they get to roll, you can really get some nice spikes there as well. So now that I've picked out my subcult and I kind of have an idea of big picture what I want to do and what I want to build around, we're going to put those things together and we're going to start refining the big picture plan. So that's going to start with what exactly are we going to be playing? Are we going to be playing missions out of the Arcs of Omen? Are we going to be playing like narrative stuff that we've put together with some friends? Is this kind of an ongoing crusade? For this exercise, again, it's going to be Arcs of Omen missions, meaning, primary and secondary scoring. And this is where a lot of this is going to change from the Balance Dataslate. So I'm looking for a big turn 1 and turn 2 in secondary scoring. The plan is to leverage the advance and actions as quickly as possible to jump out to a big secondary lead, and then play the primary as well as possible, since this Hivecult isn't going to have any of the durability tricks that some of the other cults are going to come with, like ones that I've used in the past, like Rusted Claw or Mirrored Cults or Twisted Helix. We're not going to have those, so I think speed is going to be our advantage there. And then to get that big turn 1 and turn 2, we were looking at Brood Swarm, where on turn 2 we could really max that out. This is now no longer really possible. I think Behind Enemy Lines is going to be the new replacement there. Overall, I like this change to the Balance Dataslate, even though it doesn't officially put Genestealer Cults in the Balance Dataslate. So we went an entire edition without that, because it's really only modifying the Arcs of Omen chapter proof book itself. So we can hang our hats on that, but I think this was the softest touch they could apply. I think it limits all the cults equally and kind of forces Genestealer Cult players to make some different choices about what secondaries are good for them. So I like that overall. And then the other ones we're looking at, retrieve battlefield data or banners, depending on what the setup is. If it's a map where I can get 3 banners up on turn 1, we'll probably lean into banners. If not, we'll do retrieve battlefield data and try and get 3 of those on turn 1. For our third selection, we're looking at ambush or abhor the witch. Abhor the witch in matchups that have something like Grey Knights or Thousand Suns, where it's just nice to be rewarded for eliminating opponents' units. Obviously, those are all sort of fluctuating, but that's where I'm starting my crafting with. That's what we're going to try and do as those 3 objectives. Another thing you got to remember when we're looking at refine the big picture to keep in mind is what your board layout's going to be. So is this tournament going to be player place terrain? Is it going to be, Games Workshop layout? That's going to really make a difference on what kind of units that you put into your list. So just keep that in mind and be aware of it. There's certainly things you can do to just kind of put together an all-around list, but if you know you're going to be on player place terrain and you know you're going to be able to generate your own firing lanes, that's helpful. Also with player place terrain, proficient planning like Excavate goes up in value quite a bit, in my opinion. Here we are, step 4, and believe it or not, we're actually ready to start putting some units into our list here. So now that we kind of have a rough idea of what we're going to be building for and how we want this army to play, we can start filling it out. Now, this first pass, I usually fill in about 12 to 1,500 points, and it's going to be units that are kind of auto-includes, right? So I know based on what I am thinking so far through the first 3 steps that this is going to be a shooting army. Neophytes lean into crossfire, so I'm going to need lots of neophytes. I'm going to need I'm going to need a Nexus to leverage the Hive Lord ability. So there's some auto includes there. I know that I'm going to need some jackals to be able to get retrieve battlefield data and to move some speed. So there's just a few things that are good in Genestealer Cults. We're going to throw those into the list. So what we come up with on our first pass is a Primus, a Nexus, a Kellermorph because he's a Kellermorph, an Icon Ward to resurrect bikes, a Sanctus to give out crossfire markers, and then an interesting choice here that I haven't really played with a whole lot in 9th edition is the Jackal Alphys. I love the model, and I specifically put it in for this one because priority target is going to help us achieve that 3 exposed per turn goal that we're going for, because when I shoot with this 3 squads of neophytes that are going to have the exploding 6s on them, we want to make sure that we're also getting +1 to wound to maximize, again, as much efficiency out of those shots as we can. So we know we're going to take 3 squads of 20 neophytes. We know we're going to take 2 squads of 10 jackals. And so that puts us at 1,300 points roughly, and we have a pretty good idea of what characters are going to be on our list. So after we've done our first pass on the units, and we kind of have the core of our list rounded out, we're going to step away and we're going to look at relics, traits, broodmind, and proficient planning. Now, this list is not going to include a magus, so we're not going to have any broodmind. We do know what relics we're going to take. We know we're going to take Wormtooth rounds because we have a Kellermorph. We know we're going to take the cranial inlay for the Nexus. And then I've also put Oppressor's Bane. Interesting. I'm pretty sure that's supposed to say Oppressor's Bane, but hey, Oppressor's Bane is also going on this list. It's from the lesser known cults. So one of the things that's going to be crucial to this army is the ability to protect these neophyte blobs that we're building everything around. So the ability to either move them out to where they have a better chance to fire or into cover, set them up in underground and then come up 3 inches away. Now, lying in wait is something that on 20-man neophytes we've talked about before. So that's kind of what we're thinking about here at this point. So we've added our traits, our relics, and about 65 points of proficient planning onto our list. And that means it's time to do our second pass at our units, and this is where we're really going to round out the rest of our list. So some questions that you always want to ask yourself. Does your list have any redundancy? Now, this is a term you're going to hear a lot, especially if you're looking at more competitive content. And simply what redundancy is when shit goes sideways, then what's your plan? So for my list, if we're really banking on being able to do all these actions turn 1 and turn 2, what happens if I don't get to go first and I lose my jackals on turn 1, right? What mechanics are in my list? What units are in my list to be able to recover from that? Or am I going to lose on turn 1 if I lose my jackals? So that's a simple way to think of redundancy. I don't own any more jackals. I only own 20 of them. Otherwise, adding more jackals would, at least one more squad, would be an easy solution to solve the redundancies. But I do own lots of neophytes. So we're going to add in 2 10-man squads of neophytes. These are probably going to be armed with stubbers just for points reasons. But those are going to be sort of backup go and do actions. We have at least 2 5-man squads of acolytes because I never feel comfortable leaving home without acolytes. And especially now with the changes to Brood Swarm and looking more at behind enemy lines, 5-man acolyte squads are going to be the mechanism that scores that, I think, the best. 2 Goliaths. At the moment, those are Rock Grinder versions, but depending on points needs, those might change. Now, those went in the original version of this when I started planning this list out, included 2 10-man squads of Pure Strains to give some melee. I ended up going with the Goliaths instead because there are fewer points. They have fewer attacks by a lot, but they hit a little bit harder. They have a higher strength than the Pure Strains do. And in Hivecult, there's really no way to enhance the Pure Strains, especially if I don't take a Magus. So the Goliaths are going to have decent melee profiles. They're decently tough, and they also are good platforms for some more heavy weapons. So that is why the Goliaths made it in there. I think what I'm going to do, just for fun's sake, is I think the Sanctus is going to get dropped out, and we're going to go with a Saboteur and Oppressor's Bane. They're the same number of points. I think overall the Sanctus is going to be the stronger choice. It's a more consistent thing. But the Saboteur does bring some fun stuff that we haven't experimented with a whole lot in 9th edition. Another staple of many of my lists in the past has been a Biophagus. I like the genomic enhancements. It's less useful in this Hivecult because we don't have a whole lot of threats that are going to benefit from the melee enhancements, the +1 or the -1 AP, or the exploding 6s in melee. We really only have those 10-man squads of jackals. But the 5+ feel no pain is going to be nice when we can roll for it and we can do the proficient planning, Alchemist Supreme, to pick one of our neophyte squads. Now, previously the plan had been the one that was going to go into the enemy deployment zone to try and score Brood Swarm. We're going to put that 5+ feel no pain on them to see if we can maybe get 2 turns out of that. But with that gone, we're going to have to redo some planning. After we've gone through our ads and we're very close to 2,000 points, we need to start asking ourselves and do kind of a double check of what our vulnerabilities are. Am I using too many characters from an assassin standpoint and also from a mental standpoint, right? We talked about this in the datasheet section. The more characters you add in with the more special abilities, the more you have to plan for, the more you have to keep track of during your turn. And it can lead to some mental fatigue. It can also lead to questions about time. Time is a factor in a game, so you want to keep that in mind. And then sequencing, and this kind of leads back to the too many characters thing. Is our build around plan too complex that if we forget one step at one point in a turn, like the whole thing kind of falls apart? This Hivecult might be leaning a little bit close to that like sequencing snafu, but we'll see. Once you think you have your list finalized, go over everything and keep in mind kind of what your big picture plan is and your refined plan, and do the units in your list support what your plan was? And then be honest with yourself. Is this a list that I can pilot? Is a question I always ask myself, given my skill level and my experience. Is this really something I can do, or am I setting myself up for failure because I've made a list that's too complex and I'm just going to get frustrated with it? Tip 8 is practice. And not necessarily against an opponent, not in a full match, but once you kind of have your list set up, especially in Genestealer Cult, I can't recommend it enough. Practice your deployment with your blips, set your blips, and then set your units up and make sure that you're actually spacing your blips out enough to be able to fill out or to be able to fit your units in where you've selected them to, because that is a thing, especially, and this circles back around to the time element we talked about earlier. You don't want to eat up a whole bunch of your time thinking about your deployment. You really kind of want to have a few deployment options that you've practiced and rehearsed and that so depending on how the board looks and what opponents you're facing, you already have a plan for your deployment. Practice out a turn one, like a mock turn one with yourself. What happens if I go first? What happens if I go second? Step 9, get some games in. That's the fun part, right? Theory is all well and good, but nothing replaces experience and facing an opponent. Plus, it's fun, and playing games is kind of what we set out to do, right? That's my thought process for how I approach list building. There's lots of ways to do it. This is just what I've found over the years has worked for me. So now we're going to go through, I'm going to just, from Battlescribe, go through all of my selections for my Hivecult list. So overall, this is an Arcs of Omen detachment, as we discussed. I'm going to start with 2 CP, and it's 2,000 points on the nose. My compulsory type is troops. It's a strike force battle size, Hivecult creed, and game type is chapter approved Arcs of Omen. In the no force organization slot, I have my Kellermorph, and that's where we put excavate as well as the Wormtooth round relic, so 1 CP. And a proficient planning puts him at 100 points. I have the Nexus, also minus 1 CP for the cranial inlay. In our HQ slot, we have the Acolyte Icon Ward. He's running bear. We have the Jackal Alphys. She's also running bear. And then we have a Primus, and he's rocking the Hive Lord trait. In our troop selection, we have 8 selections. We have 8 units altogether for a total of 900 points. We ended up with 3 Acolyte squads of 5. Now, I put a 5-point special weapon on each squad. I haven't quite decided yet if it's going to be demolition charges or saws. Saws is probably the way to go there. I had 15 points left over, and that's where we stashed them. And then we come to our neophytes. So we have the 3 blobs of 20. Each one of these units has a proficient planning upgrade. So they came from below. That's going to allow us to move, a pregame move. We have lying in wait for 3 inches. And then we have from every angle, as we discussed. So one of these squads is 4 mining lasers with grenade launchers. And 2 of these squads are seismic cannons with Webers. And then we have 2 10-man squads of neophytes with heavy stubbers and Webers, so 2 heavy stubbers, 2 Webers in those, just to keep the points low on them. So those came out at 70 points. Now in the elite section, here's where things get a little I don't know, odd and really different from what I've built in the past. I looked at a lot of different options here. We talked about the pure strains. I looked at maybe some metamorphs. Ultimately, I decided there wasn't anything in the elite section that unit-wise that I thought brought anything to the table that really played into the overall theme of this list. So we went with more characters. So we went with the Biophagus, and he's got the Alchemist Familiar. He's got the Proficient Planning Alchemist Supreme. So one of those 20-man blobs of neophytes is going to get a 5+ Feel No Pain. I decided that any of the genomic enhancement abilities on the Jackals would be fine. So if he can get two more genomic enhancements on those units, and maybe one more Feel No Pain on a neophyte squad, I think he'll have earned his points. And then the other elite, we did decide to drop the Sanctus and go with the Reductus Saboteur with the Oppressor's Bane. Like I said, I think the Sanctus is the more obvious choice here because it's a guaranteed crossfire marker, anywhere within 36 inches invisible to him. The Reductus Saboteur is going to be a little bit different because the Oppressor's Bane has a shorter range, and she's actually got a roll for it. But again, we're going to go with something that's a little bit different than what we usually run, because this will probably be the last 9th edition list that we put together and play with. We have the two 10-man squads of Adelan Jackals. I thought about maybe doing, like a Ridge Runner here or something, but ultimately there wasn't really points for it. And then we have the 2 Goliaths to round out the bottom of the list. And they have demolition charges and heavy seismic cannons. All right, well, that's my entire thought process for list building, and that's the Hivecult list I came up with. So we're going to keep putting together these endless hordes of neophytes here that seem to never end, and we're going to try and get a practice game in next week sometime with these bad boys. I'll let you all know how it goes, and we'll see any tweaks that come to this list. We'll stay updated on. Also coming up next week, we're gonna have to take a look at 10th edition news because there's just been so much of it coming out, and then we are gonna look at a magnetizing Goliath video coming up as well, so that we as we start the serious countdown to 10th, we can leverage ourselves to the best possible situation for our models. Especially, I know that there's a lot of you out there that are working on your first couple of combat patrols or whatever, and want to make sure that you're in a good position to get the most out of those units as we roll into a new edition. If you are excited about those videos, if you like this video, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That's the best way you can support it. Also, give this episode a like, ring the bell for notifications so you know when more good content is released. I hope you all continue to have a wonderful start to your spring, and I hope all of your hobby endeavors go exceedingly well for you. I know there's a couple of you that we talked in the comments with that are doing tournaments in April. I don't know if those have happened yet for you, but I hope that you win all of them and bring much glory to the Four-Armed Emperor. And until next time, remember to geek your own way.